Time now for our weekly partnership with the Daily Poster, and the great David Sirota joins us now. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you, David.
Good to see you.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got a couple pieces we wanted to talk to you about this week, but let's start with Democrats have made this big pivot. They said, forget about all this, healthcare, paid sick leave, these things, economic things we were talking about before. Now we're going to focus on voting rights with an equally implausible, path towards victory. It's sort of like doomed to fail from the start. But you have a great piece pointing out that even if they could succeed, voting rights alone is not sufficient. It's headlined, "Democracy alone will not save Democrats. Voting rights without economic rights is not democracy, it's theater, and most Americans know it." Elaborate on that.
Sure. I mean, look, democracy is valued in a society if democracy is shown to actually deliver real material gains for most voters. And I think over the course of many, many decades, our democracy has been telling voters that, frankly, that their vote doesn't really matter all that much. That we have a system of government that one study found just simply does not reflect anything that voters actually want. It does not deliver those things. And so the idea of Democrats shifting to voting rights and sort of setting aside their economic promises, I think fundamentally misunderstands, first of all, how to win elections. But secondly, what will motivate people to go to the polls to protect democracy. Look, we have a democracy crisis in this country that's been going on a lot longer than the last few years. We have a democracy crisis where elections are bought, politicians are owned, and lobbyists write legislation. That is the fundamental democracy crisis. That's why many times elections don't seem to result in policy change. And so if you want to actually motivate people to fortify democracy, I would argue what you need to do first and foremost is actually show that you're delivering real material gains to people, passing a $15 minimum wage, passing various economic initiatives that you promised, extending the child tax credit. These are just a couple of examples. And in not doing that, and then in going out and saying, listen, the election's just going to be about voting rights, is that really going to motivate people when you're showing people that them continuing to vote doesn't necessarily deliver the promises that you made?
This is the thing I'm fascinated by too, David, because it's not like they're arguing they're going to do anything with it. They're just like, we have to pass this. And people are like, okay, why? What are you going to do? And they're like, well, we just have to. It's not like they're making a case. Yesterday Biden said they were going to break up the Build Back Better agenda, but he didn't say which parts. We went through it, Krystal and I did this morning, and we were like, okay, so would it be prescription drugs? No, because Sinema is not going to vote for that. Would it be the college portion? No, because Manchin said he won't vote for that. Would it be the child tax credit? No, Manchin said he wouldn't vote for that. Or then the two of them said that they wouldn't vote for a corporate tax rate hike or something like that. So what would you actually end up even putting on the floor? Like they're not making a case for why they should be handed power or to have democracy to do anything currently.
That's the fundamental problem is that they're not actually about anything. And so the bottom line fallback, the fallback of last resort is voting rights. And I think it's important to understand that voting rights ultimately doesn't threaten capital. It doesn't threaten corporate power in a country where elections do not result in economic changes that fundamentally restructure the economy to work for working people. And if you understand the Democratic Party and its contradiction, the Democratic Party essentially is trying to enrich its corporate donors and tell voters it's going to solve problems created by those corporate donors. And so what oftentimes happens is Democrats put forward bills that then get watered down, or they put forward initiatives that don't fundamentally threaten the donor class. Now, I'm not saying voting rights isn't important. I think voting rights is extremely important. But again, voting rights in absence of economic policies that challenge corporate power, that doesn't offend the donor class. But the problem is it doesn't necessarily motivate lots of voters. You can see that in polls. It doesn't necessarily motivate lots of voters who are asking, if democracy is so important, why is democracy not delivering for me?
Yeah. Well, I always think about Barack Obama with his whole don't boo, vote thing. And people did. They voted for him twice. Then they were pissed off with that. They voted for Trump, then they were pissed off with that. They voted for Biden. And throughout all of this, many, many things remained the same. We continued to have this, very similar levels of brokenness in our healthcare system. We got some moderate improvements under Barack Obama, but overall, capital basically has control of the system. And that's not to say both parties are identical, but as Marianne Williamson has been talking about lately, like one of them is like death for the working class and the other one is like managed decline. So it's not an amazing choice either way. How do you ultimately get out of this? Because as long as they're captured by these people, it's hard to see how they do anything other than kayfabe. I mean, democracy, what you're pointing to here, democracy and your vote is irrelevant when they're just going to represent the interests of their corporate donors and, put on a show with Lin-Manuel Miranda instead of actually governing.
Well, look, they can make a real effort. They can start by making a real serious effort to improve people's lives economically. I mean, Joe Biden has a stack of executive actions on his desk that he could take to actually improve people's lives. He could use, for instance, the power at HHS to start lowering drug prices in America. He could start canceling student debt. The American Prospect has done great work on this. They have a thing called the Day One Project, which is just all of the executive orders that Joe Biden could sign right now that he hasn't signed. So my point is that first and foremost, you want to actually make a real effort to pass a real economic agenda. And I would argue that they haven't even made that effort. Now, I know the argument is, well, what are you going to do about Manchin and Sinema? Well, there are ways to put more pressure on them. But there's always a rotating villain, right? The Democrats always seem to have one or two senators that they can point to and say, hey, listen, those are really the two problems. The rest of us are all on board. But the fact that there's always a rotating villain suggests the fix is in. In other words, that though the rotating villain is actually doing the dirty work for far more than one or two senators, that the rotating villain allows Democrats rank and file Democrats to go out and say, hey, listen, we are pushing, but we're pushing for something that's already predetermined, already doomed. It really ends up saying to voters, this whole thing is performance. It's not real.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point.
You've got another piece, David, that we wanted to get you to break down for us about BlackRock's greenwashing. And, this has been sort of corporate America's hobby horse lately, is portraying themselves as, we're not really just all about the bottom line anymore. We got the business roundtable. We've got these statements of principle. This is why they all gather at Davos for the World Economic Forum to pretend that they're these magnificent saviors of the world, when in reality, what is actually going on, David explained to us, when BlackRock is claiming to be this focused on the climate crisis and green company, what are they really doing?
Sure. I mean, it's straight up hypocrisy. I mean, Larry Fink at BlackRock, the head of BlackRock, has been touting himself as a forward thinker on climate, and they do this letter every year from Fink. And it should be understood, BlackRock is an owner and investor in many, many companies. And BlackRock has basically been saying, we support companies moving to more sustainable climate policies. But of course, the problem is that BlackRock is also putting large amounts of capital into the fossil fuel industry. I mean, just this week, Fink put out a letter saying this kind of climate rhetoric, but only about a month ago, BlackRock became a majority owner in a $15 billion fossil fuel pipeline deal in Saudi Arabia. That's just one example. I mean, it's a company that has pumped money into fossil fuel projects, coal projects all over the world. So it's the classic divide between what is said publicly and what is actually being done with the money. Now, BlackRock has argued, listen, we still invest in bridge fossil fuel infrastructure that we argue is necessary to get to better climate policies. But the bottom line is that BlackRock has become a serious and significant obstacle to things like the divestment movement, to things like actual efforts to reduce the amount of capital going into fossil fuels. And I think that's their strategy. They want to have the nice brand. That's why we use the term greenwash. They want to have the nice brand, but they don't necessarily want to actually fundamentally change their business models. And the problem is with the science is if a company like BlackRock, a $10 trillion company, does not change its business practices, then the science and physics is telling us our planet's livable ecosystem is screwed.
It's a great piece.
There's one other piece of this that I think is important, because oftentimes moving towards, green energy or sustainability or dealing with the climate crisis is pitted against jobs and support for workers. So someone on the other side might say, listen, not great, but at least BlackRock is investing in these jobs. Workers, can earn a living. Well, we know, because we've covered here extensively, they're one of the major backers of Warrior Met Coal, which those miners have been out on strike for months and months now. All they want is to be able to get back to the wages and the benefits that they had in 2016. BlackRock certainly has plenty of money to be able to make these miners have just, the bare basics of a dignified life. And they have been totally adamant and opposed to coming to the table and, again, giving these miners just what they had in 2016.
Well, yeah, and the idea that there aren't jobs to be created in a green economy is just preposterous. I mean, there have been studies out that show that actually, in the age of automation and the like, that various parts of the fossil fuel industry have a low job creation rate per amount of money going into the fossil fuel industry. That, in other words, that the fossil fuel industry is not some incredible engine of job growth, and certainly not as necessarily as big an engine of job growth as retrofitting the economy to a more green economy can be. So I agree with you. That jobs argument has been an argument that's been made against green policies forever. It just doesn't actually hold up. And again, I go back to the science here. In addition to it not holding up, we all have to live on this planet. I mean, how much more stark could the climate science be about what we need to start doing?
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you, David. Love both of those pieces.
Great
of course, we always appreciate you coming on, having the partnership with you. So thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Everybody go subscribe to the Daily Poster, otherwise you're missing out.
That's right.
Thanks to both of you.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for watching. We will have more for you later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.